So, Dan, what do you think? Should governments be the ones who are responsible for managing pollution?
Well, from my point of view, yes, they should. Definitely. Because it's a global problem. It affects everyone. But you don't think so?
Well, no, I think it's more about individual responsibility. Individuals and companies, well, they all need to take responsibility for their own actions. You know, whatever they do that contributes to carbon emissions or whatever.
But why?
Well, look, it just makes sense to me that the people who cause the pollution should be more responsible.
Well, I think it makes more sense for governments to do it if the governments are actually...
Right, so what perspectives might there be on this topic? Apart from the environmental perspective, obviously.
Well, I think just in that statement you've clearly got three groups. The government is the political perspective. Individuals, the general public, that's the social perspective. And then companies would have a commercial perspective.
Yeah, that's right, okay. Well, so what political perspective might there be on this idea?
Well, politically, you'd want some control on who managed it, and also how.
Politically speaking, the responsibility would probably be put back onto companies and people, wouldn't it? I mean, for example, by creating new laws?
Exactly, yes. So I would say from a political perspective, it would become the responsibility of companies and individuals and not the government, through the creation of new laws.
Yeah, I agree with that. Okay, how about socially, the social perspective? I mean, don't people think that they pay their taxes, so basically the government should take care of it?
That's true. But I think a lot of people are also quite green, you know? They're quite environmentally minded.
Yes, but they still expect the government to have a role. I think socially speaking, it's difficult to have just one perspective. You know, because everyone's different. I would say most people would see this as mainly the government's role, but not only the government's role.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So it's mostly the government's responsibility, but not only the government's. And individuals should take some responsibility too. Okay, so what about from a commercial perspective?
Well, no company likes to spend money unless it has to.
Right. Companies aren't going to take responsibility unless the government makes them. So commercially speaking, there has to be a financial benefit for companies to be more green, I suppose. I think many companies would probably say it's the government's role and they'll only do what they have to within the law.
Yeah, that's the key difference for me between the social and commercial perspectives. Individual people might take some responsibility, but companies won't take responsibility without a good reason, or unless the law makes them.
Okay, so we think that it has to be mainly the government's responsibility. Because, as we said, commercially there's no profit to be made, so companies won't take responsibility.
Yes, but I'd also add that society should, and probably does, take some responsibility.
So, come on then, Dan. What are your views on this issue? I mean, should university education be provided for free by the government?
Well, yeah. From my point of view, it should be. If you look at it from an economic perspective, a highly educated country, well, it usually has a strong economy. So it's probably going to benefit the whole of society to educate people for free. I mean, what do you think?
In my view, it shouldn't be free.
Really?
No. I think if you want to go to university, you should be, you should be prepared to pay for it.
No.
Otherwise, it's just, look, it's far too expensive for the economy, especially in this economic climate. Governments, they don't want to support free education.
Okay, I can see what you're saying. But in most countries, people pay their taxes, so they should have a right to education, surely. I mean, the economy gets the benefit because people's incomes will be higher if they have a better education, so the government gets more income tax eventually, anyway.
I see what you mean, but I don't know. I'm not sure that's the case. I mean, I think it depends on, the university and the subject you study. And anyway, look, some people go just for an education. Not everyone goes just so they can make money.
But surely, if they have to pay, that means only people with money will get to go to university. I mean, really? Morally speaking, is that right? Is it fair?
Oh, okay. Perhaps we should look at this from a different perspective. Have you actually...
Unit 3. 3.4. Extract 1.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes to decide on the 3 most important qualities that make a good language learner. Does anyone have any ideas?
Well, yes. I think as far as I'm concerned, it's about focus. If you focus on the task, really focus, then you will, you'll achieve results.
All right, but what type of focus? Do you mean like focus on exams or taking your lecture notes or what?
No, not exactly, no. I mean that you have to focus on the big picture. Focus is when you have a clear idea what you want to achieve and why. In other words, you know where you're going and you're clear about what you need to do to get there.
I see. And so you're saying that focus is the most important thing?
Well, yes, focus, being committed to your goals.
Okay, right. And what about you, Karina? What do you think makes a good language learner?
Well, I would say motivation.
Right. Yes?
And, we were looking at that text earlier, and it talks about 2 kinds of motivation: intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation.
Can you explain what you mean by intrinsic and extrinsic motivation? It seems like they can be defined differently.
Okay, well, in very simple terms, you could say, like, inside and outside motivation.
Sorry, can you explain that?
Yes. Do you mean, like, inside your head?
Okay, what I mean by intrinsic motivation is motivation that comes from inside you. So it has nothing to do with outside factors or with what other people want from you. But motivation can also be extrinsic, which means it comes from outside. It's in the text, guys.
Okay.
So, if you really want to achieve something, let's say run a marathon or, learn Arabic or something, if you're motivated enough, you'll do it. You will be successful ultimately.
So, it's like focus then? It's the same thing?
Well, not exactly, because, look, to put it another way, if you're intrinsically motivated, then you'll do it because you really want to do it. And that will drive you to do it, even if it's really hard.
And for extrinsic motivation, an example?
Well, I think with extrinsic motivation, there's often some kind of reward, like money or like higher status, and that's what motivates you.
So maybe we should just start by picking out a few of the main ideas.
Yeah, okay. It says in the text that there are currently about 1 billion cars in the world.
Oh.
I'm surprised it's no more, really. Well, that's only 1 car for every 7 people. Well, in the States, it's at least 1 car per family, and well, often it's 2 or 3.
Yes, it's the same in Turkey as well. But I don't know what you can do about it. I mean, the problem is that cars improve everyone's lives. So, as the text says, and I have to agree, cars aren't going to go away. We all depend on them so much.
Exactly, yes. Well, I don't see how you could convince someone to give up their car if they can afford it. I mean, everyone knows there are problems. The text talks about, using up oil supplies, pollution, traffic congestion, and I understand all that. You can't argue with the evidence, but I just think most people, well, me included, find it really difficult to step back and say, actually, cars are bad for the environment. I'm not going to use one anymore.
I understand what you're saying, but I don't think it's as simple as, shall I have a car or not? Or how much I should use it. I mean, according to the text, it's also about how we think about the technology and just having better systems, isn't it? If you look at paragraphs 2 and 3, it suggests a number of possible alternatives. Let me find it. Wait a minute. Here. It says vehicles need to change, as do the energy and transportation systems in which they are embedded. I think that's pretty clear.
I suppose so. But it seems to me that these ideas are for the developed world. In the developing world, Africa or wherever, if someone can afford a car, they're going to buy one. They're going to use it. I mean, wouldn't you? And a lot of governments in the developing world just don't have the resources, the money to develop the right kind of infrastructure. So I don't necessarily agree with that point.
Yes. Okay, I see your point. But the authors also suggest that if we don't make these changes, we're all going to suffer. Economically, environmentally.
Okay, yeah.
And they argue that even if we make these changes, there are still going to be big problems. I just think we have to take this really seriously.
So, do you think the situation is really that bad?
Well, if you look at the first paragraph, I think it's difficult to argue with the points. I mean, according to the text, the number of cars is increasing, which means the problem will only get worse.
I suppose so, but it seems to me that there are more serious threats to society than cars. I mean, overpopulation, water supply. There are other things to worry about.
I understand what you're saying, but isn't it all connected? I mean, the authors also suggest that there's a connection with climate change.
But, well, yes, I have to agree with that. But the text also says that we need a radical solution. We need to make big changes in the technology and the infrastructure. I don't necessarily agree with that point.
So, what did you think of Professor Chapman's presentation?
Well, it just reminded me how much work I have to do. I'm not doing enough studying.
Yes, well, it's the same for me. But I meant, about the information on learning and assessments, all that stuff about how to study.
I'm glad he talked about all that. It was interesting. I mean, he's right. We do need to manage our learning and our assignments more effectively. Yeah, I think it's good that he talked about it.
Yes, I guess we already know that, but what I found interesting was what he said about working together and how we are expected to work together on the learning assignments. So we depend on each other for our assessments. I think that's really important.
I know. I read about it in the prospectus.
Come on, you know what I mean. What I meant was, basically, we've got to work together and study together.
Hi. Oh, hello. I didn't see you in the presentation.
No, I couldn't make it this morning. I feel really bad about missing Professor Chapman's presentation. Could you maybe explain the main points?
Of course. Actually, he said in the presentation that when you have to explain something to another student, you understand it better yourself.
Yes, and it's true. In France, when I was at university in France, it was very competitive. But actually, we all worked together. We helped each other a lot.
You mean like helping each other with the answers?
No, not that. What I'm trying to say is, In France, we worked together a lot. We got together and shared our ideas. We helped each other with our work. So maybe we should do the same thing here. Maybe we should set up our own study network.
OK, why not?
OK, well, we've got half an hour now. Why don't we have a coffee and talk about how to do it? So how do you actually work together? I mean, Professor Chapman was talking about study networks, study groups. How did they work for you in France?
Okay, well, we used to meet regularly and work out how to do our assignments, what to read, what the texts mean. Quite difficult things, like what the tutor wanted us to do and what ideas to use.
That sounds interesting. Well, I think you're right. We should set up our own study network.
What is a study network exactly?
Well, basically, there's the work we all have to do individually.
OK.
So that means, obviously, our assignments and assessments. But there are a lot of opportunities to work in groups, too. For example, we have to do a group presentation this term. And there are online discussion groups.
Yes, so we need to look for these opportunities. And Professor Chapman said we'll get regular study quizzes.
That's good. We used to have pop quizzes, like a testing class, but they didn't tell us in advance. It was to check our learning.
Oh, that's interesting. So regular progress tests, is that what you mean?
Yeah, progress tests. That's right.
So, out of interest, do either of you normally study in groups with other students? Or do you study alone?
I like studying in groups.
I usually study on my own.
That's what I was going to say. I think studying in groups is really useful, but I usually work on my own, like you.
Okay, good. So, the next question is, do we really want to go ahead and set up a study network? Or do we want to join a study network that already exists?
OK, well, first of all, Professor Chapman said that we have to maximise our study opportunities.
What does that mean?
Well, basically, what it means is that we have to take responsibility. So, let's try to come up with some concrete ideas for our study network.
Okay, let's start with some questions.
I'll write them down.
Thanks. So, first, what's our aim? What's the point of having a study network?
Well, I think...
Hold on, let's just get the questions down first. Then we can think about the answers.
Okay. What about resources? What do we need?
Okay, that's good.
And who's going to join the network?
Excellent. How big will it be? How many people?
What are the responsibilities? How will the network be managed?
Oh, I have another question. How does it all fit in with what we already do? We already have a lot of face-to-face learning, like lectures and seminars.
What, you think it might be a waste of time?
Well, no, but what I'm saying is, how does a study network add to all that? What's the extra value?
Can we come back to resources? Remember what Professor Chapman said about resources, that you should make sure that they help you and they don't dictate what you do, he said.
OK, fine. So, what approach should we take? And should we look for some kind of study network system that's already out there somewhere? Or should we try to work with what we've got?
Yeah.
1.
I know. I read about it in the prospectus.
Come on, you know what I mean. What I meant was, basically, we've got to work together and study together. 2. Yes, and it's true. In France, when I was at university in France, it was very competitive. But actually, we all worked together. We helped each other a lot.
You mean like helping each other with the answers?
No, not that. What I'm trying to say is, in France, we worked together a lot. We got together and shared our ideas. We helped each other with our work. So maybe we should do the same thing here. Maybe we should set up our own study network.
3.
So that means, obviously, our assignments and assessments, but there are a lot of opportunities to work in groups, too. For example, we have to do a group presentation this term, and there are online discussion groups.
4.
Okay, well, first of all, Professor Chapman said that we have to maximise our study opportunities.
What does that mean?
Well, basically, what it means is that we have to take responsibility. So, let's try to come up with some concrete ideas for our study network.
5.
I have another question. How does it all fit in with what we already do? We already have a lot of face-to-face learning, like lectures and seminars.
What, you think it might be a waste of time?
Well, no, but what I'm saying is, how does a study network add to all that?
Oh.
What's the extra value?
It's pretty obvious, really, isn't it? That a more innovative firm is going to be more successful.
Well, I'm not so sure. I mean, there are a lot of innovative firms that have failed, that aren't really successful.
So what you're saying is that the innovative firms aren't always the successful ones?
Well, yes. I mean, you always hear about the successful ones, like Apple and Microsoft, but there must be hundreds of others that fail, even though they're quite innovative. But then, as the text says, companies that aren't aware of technological change or aren't prepared for it, they're in a dangerous position.
Yes, and if you're, successfully innovative, it can put you in a good position. Like the text says, you can end up with a bigger market share. As you said, Apple are incredibly successful and incredibly innovative. I mean, the products, the design, their brand, everything.
Yeah. And following on from that point, it can also help products or brands that aren't selling so well. I mean, the text gives Lego as an example. But I also think of when BMW started producing the new Mini, and it suddenly became cool again.
Yeah, and I think Apple is like that too. And another point the text raises is about globalization. The global organisation is the easiest one for a company, I think.
Do you mean it's the easiest kind of innovation for companies to take advantage of?
Well, yeah, because the company doesn't have to be innovative. They just have to see what's there and take advantage of it. Do you see what I mean?
I think so. You mean someone else does the innovating, so the company takes less of a risk?
Yeah, exactly. A firm can have its head office in one location, but have different parts of the business based anywhere. The last point in the text about the size of a company, I think it's the most interesting.
Yeah.
That small firms now have a chance to compete with big firms. I think that's a really important point.
Really? So what you're saying is being big is not an advantage anymore?
Well, no, not quite, but they at least have a chance to compete. A smaller firm selling a niche product can actually reach a lot of customers now, much more easily than in the past.
Well, they're not really competing, though, are they? I mean, if a big company wanted to sell the same product, they could. So it's a bigger market, but there's not really direct competition. Does that make sense?
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you mean the company is more innovative, it's stronger, but it's still not competing.
Exactly. Like it says in the text, innovations like the internet mean they can potentially sell to a lot more people. But it's common sense that spending money on research and development is an advantage to a firm, isn't it?
Do you mean companies are going to be more successful the more they spend? I'm not sure I agree with that. That means that a lot of companies must waste a lot of money never really going anywhere. I mean, look, if it was that easy, everyone would do it. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Well, yes, I think so. If I understand you correctly, you think a lot of money is invested and effectively it's wasted. They never get it back.
Exactly. It's not that simple. If research equals success equals profit, everyone would do it. As you said, a lot of the time there's no return on the investment.
companies that fall behind with technology are going to fail. It's obvious.
Yes, technology helps companies operate much more globally than before.
There are a lot of companies that were successful but didn't recognize the importance of a new development.
Well, Nokia were a top mobile company, but they fell behind because they didn't move quickly enough with good smartphones.
Amazon was started in a garage, and it's now one of the biggest book retailers in the world. Well, not just books, actually.
A lot of telecoms companies had real problems because mobile phone companies took so much of the market.
As you said earlier, there's a lot of companies that have failed because they've fallen behind with technological developments.
Well, yeah, that's right. If you take the companies that sold music CDs, for example, selling online, downloads, that allowed them to not only sell to a bigger market, but it also cut production costs massively, and distribution.
Yeah.
Yeah, and following on from that point, there are also a lot of companies that were successful but just didn't recognize the importance of new developments. Some music companies are a classic example of that.
Well, there are quite a few music shops that just don't exist anymore on High Street or online. If they'd moved to downloads, more quickly or whatever, they'd probably still be doing okay.
You made an interesting point about companies not recognizing the importance of a new development quickly enough. I mean, well, Nokia is a classic example.
Exactly. They were a brand leader, but they just lost so much ground because they were too slow with smartphones.
So, we're talking about the main factors that contribute to personal happiness. OK, so, Alex, could we start with you today?
OK, thanks. Yes. Well, I read an article called Measuring the Impact of Major Life Events Upon Happiness from the International Journal of Epidemiology. It's by two researchers called Dimitri Ballas and Danny Dorling from the University of Sheffield. So, their aim was to look at ways of measuring happiness in terms of what happened in people's lives. So, what were the situations or events that affected whether or not people were happy? They looked at these mainly from an economic perspective. And the main context for their research is Britain. So, it's only people living in Britain who were interviewed. The research took place in the 1990s, so it's presented as the state of British happiness at the end of the last century, okay?
Yes, thanks, Alex.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, well, Ballas and Dorling based their research on a survey using questionnaires. These questionnaires were given out to 10,000 people living in Britain in the 1990s. And one of the questions on the survey is about happiness. So Ballas and Dorling, these researchers, they categorized 80 different types of life events into 7 categories. And these categories were 1, health-related events, 2, education, 3, employment, 4, leisure, 5, births and deaths, 6, personal relationships, so friends, family, colleagues, and 7, finance, including income. Okay, and in the results, they found that 2/3 of the respondents reported no life-changing events during the last year. So no births and deaths, no major illnesses, or whatever. But out of the other 33%, the biggest group was finance at 6.49%. So that's people who had some kind of change in their financial situation. And after that, the next largest category is personal relationships with 6%. So anyway, they analyze and discuss the results, and their main conclusions are quite clear. This is what they say, and I'm quoting, "Our analysis suggests that in British society by the end of the 20th century, personal relationships were extremely important in terms of happiness. The analysis presented in this article suggests that what matters the most in British people's lives is to have good interpersonal relationships at home and to be respected at work."
That's from the discussion section of the article?
Yes. There's one more point I'd like to make. I won't go into too much detail, but Ballas and Dorling looked at another piece of similar research, and this alternative research found that people's health is more important compared to other life events, including financial situation.
Well, thank you very much for that, Alex. OK, let's move on to our next piece of research. So that was Emily next. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you. Well, the article I read is by Rodriguez Pose and Maslow Kaita. I think that's how you say it, yeah? OK, so the article is, Can Policy Make Us Happier? Individual Characteristics, Socio-Economic Factors and Life Satisfaction in Central and Eastern Europe. It was published in 2011. Well, first of all, the context. The focus of the research is Central and Eastern European countries. The article starts out by saying that 10 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, so around the year 2000, the main characteristics which defined people in Central and Eastern European countries compared to Western Europeans was that they were poorer and less happy. The article takes a mainly economic perspective and they use data from EVS, that's the European Values Study, and Eurostat data. Anyway, in 2004, there were 10 countries that joined the European Union, and these countries were mainly former communist countries. They were called the EU 10. And during the period 1999 to 2008, the gross domestic product, the GDP of these 10 countries, grew by an average of 400%.
That's very strong growth.
Yes, but what's interesting is, during the same period, levels of individual happiness stayed more or less the same. They increased by less than 15% in most countries. The article says that the level of happiness has, and this is the quote, remained low or very low throughout the region in comparison with the EU as a whole. This relates to the Easterling paradox.
What's the Easterling paradox?
Okay, this is an idea that comes from a paper published in 1974 by Richard Easterling from the University of Southern California. And he argued that increased wealth doesn't result in increased happiness. But not everybody accepts his findings. Anyway, Stefan is going to talk about this later.
Okay, thanks.
So, moving on now to their research. Rodriguez Pose and Maslow's Kaita found many of the factors that Alex has mentioned, and a few more. For example, individual income, gender, so there are differences between men and women, age, civil status, the number of children you have, employment conditions, level of education, and where you live. These are all possible factors which can affect happiness. Anyway, these researchers emphasize that income is among the most studied factors, and they find that, and again I'm quoting from the article, wealthier people are, as a general rule, much happier.
But that's not what Easterlin says.
No, that's right. These researchers say that Easterlin is not really correct. They find that Central and Eastern Europeans aren't significantly different from people in Western Europe. What the researchers find is that, here's the quote, people tend to be happier when they're healthy, earn more, are better educated, married, and employed.
That's pretty clear.
Yes, and also, well, there has been strong economic growth, but it takes time for this to change people's levels of happiness. And economic factors can be negative as well. There's high unemployment, inflation, a lot of inequality between people. These factors can bring down people's happiness.
Well, thank you very much, Emily. That was very interesting. And now we need to hear about Stefan's research. Thank you, Stefan.
So what do you think? What choices does he have?
Well, he could leave his job, look for something else.
I suppose that's one option. Quitting his job might be a good idea. Or he could do something less drastic. For example, he could just speak to his boss. I mean, what else do you think he could do?
He could just carry on and hope it'll be okay.
You mean do nothing?
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so he basically has three options. He can leave his job, he can talk to his superiors, or he can do nothing and pretend it's not happening.
Basically, yes. So, what are the advantages and disadvantages of each of these ideas? Well, the first option certainly deals with the problem from a personal perspective, but, well, what about the other people involved?
What do you mean?
Well, arguably, that could put other people at risk. They could lose their jobs too if the situation comes to light. The company might lose a lot of business.
You think so?
Definitely. Yeah. What happens when they find that people haven't been doing their jobs properly? Or what if someone's taking money out of the company?
True. Okay, so personally, it would mean he'd be better off because he'd be out of the situation. But it might not be the right decision ethically.
And actually, it might not be the right decision personally. It's his first job. He's not very experienced. It won't look good if he moves on too quickly.
Well, okay. What about the idea of speaking to his bosses?
Yeah, I'm not sure. He could lose his job because he's not being a team player. I mean, generally speaking, companies expect everyone to be a team player. And also, if he's the one who brings up the problem, that could be a bad thing for him. You know, if he's seen as a whistleblower.
Yes, I see what you mean. But it could have the effect of getting his bosses to provide more staff. They might not realize how bad it is.
That could be the case, but I doubt it. I think they might be more likely to blame Bruce.
Okay, well, I suppose it could be argued that the last option is preferable.
What, just do nothing? You think that's an option?
Yes, arguably. If he manages to cope and the client's happy, he might get promoted.
Possibly.
Then it would be someone else's problem, not his.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, what if he can't cope? He could still lose his job and people would think it was his fault. Surely it's better to quit than be fired. I still think quitting could be his best option.
World energy supply is considered by some analysts to be a threat to world peace. It's likely that there'll be a shortage of fossil fuels in the future, and any drop in world energy supplies could cause a crisis on a scale never seen before. One issue to overcome is that modern life is dependent on high energy consumption. Many countries are looking to improve the energy efficiency of homes and offices. For example, the Chinese government hopes to address the issue by introducing a range of solutions. One option is to update and modernize power plants. Additionally, alternative sources such as wind, solar and biofuels are being explored. However, there has been a recent dispute about the use of biofuels as an alternative energy source.
We all know that our main sources of energy, coal, oil, and gas, the so-called fossil fuels, they take millions of years to develop, and at some point in the future, they are going to run out. So we have to think about this now. What happens when the oil runs out? When there's no more coal, no more gas? Where do we get our energy from? So this presentation is about some of the possible solutions to the future of energy supplies. We need to think about alternatives, about renewable sources of energy, and as we know, there are a number of these. Some countries, like Denmark for example, have already set a target of being completely independent of fossil fuels by 2050. How this can be achieved is still not clear, but there's a lot of research that suggests that there aren't really any technological or economic reasons for not making this change. So today, we're going to look at 3 of the solutions, 3 ways to generate renewable energy. What we want to do is to show that there are concerns about all of these solutions. But these concerns, these ideas, are not actually a problem because the technologies are developing and improving all the time. Okay, we only have a few minutes, so each part of the presentation will be quite short. So firstly, Louise is going to talk about solar energy and the idea that it's too expensive. Then Yakut is going to look at wind power and the concern that it's unreliable. And finally, I'll talk about a third possible solution, marine energy, energy from the sea, and the idea that it's too expensive and difficult to produce. But I should say that these are only some of the possible solutions. There isn't time to talk about all of them. So, over to you, Louisa.
So, the solution I want to talk about is solar power. And just to be clear, this means solar panels, the ones you can see on the roof of buildings or out in the countryside in big groups. A lot of people think that solar panels are expensive and not a very efficient way of creating energy. In the past, this was probably true, but because of changes in technology, solar panels have become much more efficient and cheaper, more cost-effective. For example, a few years ago, most solar panels could only capture around 10% of the sun's energy and convert this into electricity. But because of changes to the materials used to make the solar panels, there have been dramatic improvements in the cost and efficiency of using this system. Researchers in the United States have been working on photovoltaic cells. These convert the sun's energy directly into electricity, and today they can capture and convert nearer to 35% of the sun's energy. There have also been improvements to the way energy is stored. For example, in battery design, in particular a lithium-ion energy storage unit that's much more efficient than traditional batteries. What this means is solar panels are now able to generate substantially more electricity than in the past, and to store it more efficiently. So, solar energy is becoming a lot cheaper. So the belief that solar power is an expensive source of renewable energy is rapidly changing due to technological developments that have improved both costs and efficiency. Okay. Now, I'd like to hand over to Yakut to talk about the next solution.
Thanks, Louisa. So what I want to look at is wind power. People have been using wind power in different ways for thousands of years. And it's actually one of the most efficient ways of generating electricity. The main problem is the belief that wind power is too unreliable. The wind doesn't blow all the time. It blows at different speeds, in different directions. You don't know when it's going to blow. You can't rely on it. There are other concerns too. Large groups of wind turbines change the landscape. They're a danger to birds. But unreliability is the main concern. Where the wind turbines are located is important, obviously. For example, offshore wind farms, in other words, in the sea, often have a more reliable supply of wind. But what is really important is to connect wind farms together in a larger network. This is the real solution to making wind energy reliable. We need to connect the wind farms in all the different locations to a national grid, a national energy network that can store and distribute electricity efficiently across the whole region. It has been argued by some researchers that as much as 30% of our total energy needs could be met by wind power, with the right structure. So, as Andrews and Jelly say in their book, Energy Science, if we can improve storage and distribution methods, then wind energy could make a significant contribution to the supply of carbon-free electricity. Okay, so I'll hand over to Chris for the last part.
Okay, so lastly, I'm going to look at wave energy, or marine energy as it's sometimes called. The main concern about wave energy, as with any new technology, is cost. The initial costs are very high. This means that the running costs, the costs of actually producing electricity, need to be low in order for wave energy to be competitive. Another concern is that the equipment has to be tough enough to stand up to conditions at sea in all weathers. As with solar and wind power, the more investment a sector receives, the more quickly the costs come down. It's likely to take 10 to 20 years to develop the technology enough for it to be competitive. However, the Sustainable Energy Research Group from Southampton University in the UK have predicted that there is likely to be a reduction in costs over the next 20 years of up to 60%. They also say that the potential market for wave power is larger than the market for wind and solar power combined. So while the costs may be high at the moment, they'll eventually come down. This could make wave energy much more competitive in the longer term. So, to sum up, all three of the solutions we've looked at, solar, wind, and wave power, all of these solutions may have been thought of as inefficient and or expensive in the past. But over the last 10 to 15 years, environmental needs and political support have created a growing market. Now, there's an increasing amount of evidence to suggest that they will all become increasingly important sources of energy production over the next 10 to 20 years.
1. What I'm saying is that environmental and economic considerations need to be balanced.
2. What is now possible but expensive is to capture and store CO2.
3. What I'd like to emphasize are the difficulties involved in dealing with nuclear waste. 4.
Where 1,200 new wind turbines a week can be situated is hard to see.
So, do you think economic growth is a good measure of progress?
Well, it's a good question. I suppose it depends what you mean by progress.
Okay, well, let's not get into that. I mean, we're talking about things generally getting better, aren't we?
Okay, well then, from what Matt was saying, it seems that economic growth isn't a good indicator of progress, but I'm not sure I agree. I mean, if the economy's doing well, isn't that a good thing?
But what about the fact that it might not be an accurate measure? There was the example that not all goods and services are sold, so I think arguably there's a lot of economic activity going on that can't be measured because we don't know about it.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, but in a sense, we can't expect to measure everything. Now, I would argue that it still gives us a good indication of, well, how well things are progressing.
Perhaps, but then, as we heard, it also doesn't mean we know who's benefiting. We don't know anything about the distribution of wealth and if incomes are going up right across society. Some people could still be on low incomes.
That's true to a certain extent, I suppose, but then presumably the argument is that rich people will be paying higher taxes, and that money can be used by the government, for the good of everyone.
Well, only in countries where there is taxation. There's also the argument that unemployment can be higher when the economy is doing well because of technological developments, technological progress, And there's also the point about GDP being a short-term measure.
I'm sorry, but I just don't see the logic in those arguments. OK, it appears that there might not always be very high employment, but surely unemployment would be higher in an economy that's performing badly. And also, well, nothing's really a good long-term indicator, is it?
So, you mean low economic growth leads to high unemployment?
Yes. And also, an indication of good performance now tends not to be a reliable indicator of future performance.
I see what you're saying, but for me the basic measure is just wrong. As Matt said, GDP doesn't reflect individual wealth and it doesn't include all aspects of goods and services.